David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I hate to have to start this way today after the Thanksgiving holiday, but if you're watching on YouTube at least, wait, please don't hit the dislike button just yet. Consider watching this video first before you do that. I am here to talk about the unfortunate reality that a national Medicare for all is not happening anytime soon, and I'll explain why. And I'm not here as an opponent of Medicare for all. I'm not someone who wants it to fail. I'm an advocate of Medicare for all, but I'm also an advocate of being realistic with you if we want to make things happen. And the reality is that without me attacking Medicare for all, without me attacking the concept of Medicare for all, I recognize that national Medicare for all isn't happening anytime soon. I'm not here to say we should advocate for centrist policies that are more realistic. That we should advocate for the policies we think are the right ones, and the right progressive policy is Medicare for all. But I'm not here to tell you unrealistic things like, if Bernie gets elected, we'll have Medicare for all in 4 years. We won't, and I'll explain why in a second. Our politicians do enough of the unrealistic stuff. I'm here to discuss the realities, and I'm here to tell you today that because national Medicare for all simply isn't happening anytime soon, even if the next president supports it, we need to be smart. So let's go through this piece by piece, and once we're done, rather than, calling me a shill or whatever, tell me where you think I'm wrong on the reasoning, because that's really what this is about. It's about talking about the facts and reality. Number one, I've already talked about some of the areas of concern around Medicare for all plans, but that's not really what this segment is about. Yes, I've talked before about how most of the plans for how to pay for Medicare for all are unrealistically optimistic about how much healthcare spending per person will go down if we switch to Medicare for all. In reality, it could take 10 or even 20 years to see those cost reductions. I've talked about that before. That's not what I'm talking about today. There are political considerations. Even if Democrats take the Senate in 2020, which would be by the slimmest of margins, as I've outlined for you before, it's not going to be enough to pass Medicare for all. Because number one, even if Democrats do take the Senate by a few seats in 2020, you need 60 votes in order to pass something like Medicare for all, which Democrats are not going to have after this upcoming election. And not all Democrats even support Medicare for all in the Senate. You can then look at 2022, but then if you're only starting the conversation, then again, you still need 60 votes in the Senate to pass this. It's a question mark whether Democrats could even get a 60 vote majority in 2022. And of course, the alternative would be get rid of that 60 vote requirement. You can do that with a 1-seat majority, but even Bernie Sanders has hesitated to say we should get rid of that 60 vote requirement because it could massively backfire if Republicans take control again, when Republicans take control again. So that's a serious political obstacle. Doesn't matter whether Bernie's president or Warren's president or whoever. It's just a real obstacle. And then imagine that you solve that problem. You have some bigger issues to deal with. We have a conservative Supreme Court. We are going to have a conservative Supreme Court for some time. Why does that matter when we talk about Medicare for all? Two different reasons. Number one, if you don't make private insurance illegal, as some want to do, it significantly hurts the financial viability of Medicare for all. Making private insurance illegal would be almost impossible under the current Supreme Court or any Supreme Court that's like it. It will be fought endlessly by moneyed interests up to the Supreme Court. This is not a Supreme Court that will say private insurance is now illegal. It's just not going to happen. And that is something that will hurt the financial viability of Medicare for all and realistically will make it not happen politically. Issue number two, you aren't going to be able to force doctors to accept Medicare for all. Many doctors will choose to accept private insurance because, again, it's not going to be illegal. And you will see more of a move to what's called self-pay. We already see self-pay more and more in the mental health field. We see it in dentistry because dental insurance is terrible in the United States. We could spend much longer on this Supreme Court issue. But again, there is no way that a Supreme Court that is even remotely like the one we have right now would rule doctors have to accept Medicare for all. That will be a major problem for the financial viability of Medicare for all. But it won't even get to that because it is not going to be something that you will get 60 votes in the Senate for under these parameters. So what I want to talk about is not that I think Medicare for all is bad. I think it's good. I like it. I do see it as a drastic and maybe the best improvement over the system that we have. I don't want to suggest to you that it doesn't matter if a candidate supports Medicare for all. It does. We should support candidates who see Medicare for all as the gold standard and who see it as the goal. But you and I have to be realistic that it's not happening anytime soon. So before we even talk about candidates, let's talk about what could happen. Number one, it's important to get some wins that demonstrate that conceptually Medicare for all or something like it would work. These include, and this is so lame, I'm almost like going to throw up in my mouth a little bit saying it. We need to support some version of a public option as an eventual point that we get to. I said during Obamacare, Barack Obama should have started the negotiation for Medicare for all so that at minimum we end up with a strong public option. We didn't. He started with the public option and we ended up with just a massive handout of tens of millions of new customers to for-profit insurance companies. I know it's so lame and milquetoast to talk about a public option. And as I said before, all the public option will do is estimates say it'll reduce the cost of private insurance by 7 to 9% because of its impact on the market. But if we end up with the best possible version of a public option, ideally it will work well because it will be properly set up and funded. We can then point to it and say, look, that was an improvement. Let's keep going to the next step. That's number one, but that's not all. Number two, it might be possible to make a change to the Medicare eligibility age, which won't totally rock the boat. Like, for example, lowering the age to 60 or maybe to 58. This is actually step one in some people's plans for Medicare for all. Elizabeth Warren, for example, has talked about let's lower the eligibility age, better said, in steps. And that might actually be a viable first step. There would probably have to be some kind of trade, though, because, again, even many Democrats in the Senate don't support Medicare for all. That's not going to change in 2020, and it's unlikely to change in 2022. Third, and this is to me the most exciting, what about state single payer? Vermont wanted to do this, but it ended up failing for a variety of reasons that we could explore in a different segment. If Medicare for all succeeds at the state level, a serious conversation about national Medicare for all would hopefully be able to start. Obamacare mirrored years later in many ways the Romney care system that started here in Massachusetts. It falls way short of being what we want. But the point is state level success can actually push nationally implementing some of these policies. So please don't kill the messenger. This is not me attacking Medicare for all. I like Medicare for all. I want Medicare for all. This is the reality. So that doesn't mean that we now say, hey, you know what? If either way, the best we can get is a public option or lowering the eligibility age for Medicare a few years, you might as well vote for Joe Biden. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that there are a lot of people out there, and they're emailing me regularly, who seem to be making arguments and decisions based on the idea that if Bernie wins, we get Medicare for all in 4 years. That if Warren wins, for the people that believe she's for Medicare for all, and she does seem to be, then we get it within 4 years. We just don't. And I'm not being defeatist. Let's strategize around what we can do. Let's make it happen. And if you disagree with me, tell me where I'm wrong on the facts, not that I'm a shill or whatever. I want Medicare for all, but I need to be realistic about how we get there. I have some really great video for you today from a top contender for the most delusional Trump voter in the United States. Last week, during a live stream that I did on YouTube and Twitch, we happened to overlap with some of Donald Trump's MAGA rally in Florida. And Fox News sent a reporter, actually, let's call him a guy with a microphone, I think better said. They sent a guy with a microphone to a restaurant in Boca Raton, Florida, the day after the rally. And they happened to come across a business owner of a security company. This is all self-professed. I don't know if any of this stuff is true. A guy who says he owns a security company, who hires lots of veterans, who says he used to be a Democrat but is now fully backing Trump. This guy says he is all in with Trump because he's patriotic and he supports family values and he's honest. This is Trump, and has integrity of character and has delivered on his promises. I present to you today the man that might be the most delusional Trump voter in the country, at least a top contender for that position. And notice as you watch this video how sure of himself this man seems.
Sir, what's your name and what do you do?
My name is Ronnie Joseph, and I run a security company.
You run a security company. We were talking. You hire a bunch of vets. We appreciate that for sure. You used to be a Democrat. Now you're a Republican. You support the president. Why that change, and why do you support President Trump?
Well, for me, it's really quite simple. It's about family values. It's about being a patriotic American. And it just comes down to being honest and truthful to who you are. That's what I that's what I value. Family values, honesty, integrity, character, and that's everything that President Trump represents.
Absolutely. Do you feel like he's delivered on the promises that he's made?
Absolutely. Absolutely, he has.
Facts do not matter. Trump is patriotic and supports family values, is honest, has integrity of character, and has delivered on promises. Is there anything that guy said that's true? Is it even true that this guy used to be a Democrat? Maybe that's the one thing the guy said that is true. He's with Trump on the issue of family values. Trump, who has had not only endless affairs and seems to barely even know some of his children, but has paid off some of his mistresses, was involved with people whose names I can't even say because as soon as you say certain names, you get demonetized on YouTube. But I think you all know who I'm talking about. Those family values, Trump's family values, have this voter gushing over Donald Trump. He's with Trump over Trump's honesty. Trump is the most dishonest president by number of lies of any president that we are aware of. He's with Trump over integrity of character. Trump operates like a con man wannabe mafia boss. There is nothing further from integrity of character than Donald Trump. This guy is with Trump because Trump has delivered on his promises. What? He was going to fix healthcare and get rid of Obamacare. Didn't happen. He was going to build a wall. Didn't happen. He was going to fix trade. That seems to have gone the opposite direction. He was going to improve the reputation of the U.S. around the world. No, the U.S. isn't even included in many important conversations happening internationally because of Donald Trump in the Oval Office. The only value that this guy seems to share with Donald Trump is extraordinary hypocrisy. That is the one area where they seem to overlap. This is the twilight zone. This is why facts don't matter. And this is why I've been saying for years, we can't waste our time on these people. Imagine that you meet someone who says, listen, I think Trump's a scumbag liar who's embarrassing the U.S. around the world, but I'm going to be honest with you. His tax plan is good for me personally, so I'll probably vote for him. We can work with that, okay? We can talk about, listen, even if it seems like Trump's tax plan is good for you because you've got more money in your pocket, it's actually not good for you in that by hurting others, it creates societal costs. Like, my point is, we can have a conversation with someone who believes that. If you meet someone who says, I love Trump, he's honest, he has integrity of character, he has family values that I agree with, he fulfilled his promises, that's a conversation ender. There is no point. And it's actually so absurd, this video, that I had people tweeting me over the weekend saying, David, this guy has to be a plant, but I actually think a plant would be less ignorant. We cannot win by convincing these people. We have to win despite them, period. And we might not. Sadly, there may be enough tens of millions of people like that guy who voted for Trump in 2016 and are going to vote for him again in 2020 that we may lose. And that's why get out the vote is so important. Let me know what you think about this video. Leave a reply if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, send me a tweet at @dpacman. Follow me there as well. We'll take a quick break. So much to talk about today, back from Thanksgiving, and much has happened.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a quick thank you to some new David Pakman Show members. I will have the final numbers probably tomorrow from the big Black Friday membership drive that we did. It did really well. I don't know if it will be, in retrospect, the most successful membership drive ever, but it's going to be close. It'll depend on the next couple of days. Let me say thanks to Karen Hansen and Patty Riggs. Karen and Patty, Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it, particularly now going into the last 12 months. We now are really only 11 months, actually, almost to the day from the 2020 election. Also want to say thanks to Robert Myers, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day, with us almost 5 years. Join these great folks by signing up at joinpacman.com. It's been good to have a break, honestly, from the craziness of American politics for a few days. I completely checked out over the Thanksgiving break here in the United States. One of the very clear things that happened while we were gone is that Donald Trump has started to do just a really good job as president of the United States. Just kidding. I hope you didn't zone out. I'm kidding about that. What happened is that the legal noose is sort of starting to tighten around Rudy Giuliani. It was pretty clear, really more than a year ago, that the former New York City mayor was trouble for Trump. He got pulled off TV appearances for a while. He is now back front and center because of his involvement in the Ukraine fiasco. And now it really could be a tragic end for Rudy Giuliani in the Greek tragedy sense. I use that term for Donald Trump's maybe personal lawyer. I guess at this point, we don't really know what the relationship is between Rudy and Trump. Two of Rudy's associates have been arrested, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. One of them, Lev Parnas, is cooperating and says, as I told you early last week, that he can directly and specifically implicate Republican Congressman Devin Nunes in the Ukraine fiasco. We may have more news about that later this week. A grand jury has now issued a subpoena for documents related to Rudy Giuliani's international consulting, as he calls it, which is one of those innocuous terms, international consulting. I call it influence peddling and negotiating bribery and smears. And that relates to a whole bunch of possible crimes that Rudy may have committed. We're looking at money laundering, wire fraud, campaign finance violations, making false statements, obstruction of justice, violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, as it's known. We're talking here about both criminal and congressional investigations into Rudy Giuliani's work and the things that he's done. And Rudy, of course, denies everything always, telling TMZ found him at an airport, I think, over the Thanksgiving break. And he said, oh, there's no way that I'm going to end up in prison. But remember, Roger Stone told me the same thing when I interviewed him about a year and a half ago. He was, of course, recently found guilty on 7 counts and will be sentenced in a couple of months, heading to prison, potentially up to 20 years. Realistically, much, much less. What this increasingly is going to be about, so to set the stage for you for the next month, year, few years, I don't really know how long this is going to go. What is going to determine the future for Rudy Giuliani is whether Trump abandons him or sticks with him, because that's the trend. As we've already seen happen, sometimes people throw Trump under the bus and then Trump abandons them. Michael Cohen is one example. But maybe that's not exactly the way it happened. Maybe it's more that Trump makes it clear he's not going to stand by the person, and then they throw Trump under the bus. But the point is, you have on the one hand, people like Michael Cohen. On the other hand, you've got the people like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, who have at least seemingly remained loyal to Donald Trump during their prosecutions. And it's still plausible that a pardon is coming for them. We don't know yet, but it is certainly plausible. The real factor that will determine Rudy Giuliani's future is not, did he break the law or didn't he? Did he act immorally or didn't he? Did he do this or did he do that? Rudy is privileged such that he is not part of the justice system for the most of us. He's part of a different justice system where it's who your friends are, whether it's does the president remain loyal to you. That is what will determine the future for Rudy Giuliani. He has a get out of jail free card, not in a proverbial sense, in a literal sense. It's called a presidential pardon. On corporate media, they're staging these dumb little debates about, oh, does Rudy risk having his reputation tarnished by this scandal? First of all, that assumes that Rudy had a good reputation before this. Forget about that for now. That's a debate for a different day. Rudy Giuliani has become a sort of villain of the worst intersection of influence peddling, vulture capitalism, and international corruption, and has made it clear that what his values are unquenchable thirst for proximity to power, money. He will use any associations at all to further those goals. It doesn't matter what it means for the United States as a country. And that's how you end up in a position to have to day in and day out on national media defend the indefensible, which are the actions of Donald Trump. The next couple of weeks, particularly with the upcoming impeachment hearings, there are more starting Wednesday. We'll be covering them live on YouTube. They will be illuminating, I predict, about Rudy Giuliani's role, and we'll catch up about it later this week or early next when we actually get to see what is said at this week's impeachment hearings. There is a Christian pastor warning of a Jew coup to remove Donald Trump. And I must tell you, I'm surprised it took this long to become a storyline, and I'll explain that in a second. So I know that very often when we talk about anti-Semitism on the show, we end up kind of taking heat from the left and the right. The right will often just respond to stories about anti-Semitism with anti-Semitism often directed at me, proving my point. Sadly, there are some on the left who, when I talk about anti-Semitism, will minimize it. They'll say, Jews aren't really discriminated against. Sometimes they even fall into the same thinly veiled anti-Semitic tropes that exist across the political spectrum. But I have to talk about it because this is a real problem that we have on our hands. Europe is increasingly riddled with anti-Semitism. Horrible situation recently on a London subway. You can look that up if you're curious. Lots of stories to tell, not for today, though. Trump, even though his daughter Ivanka converted to Judaism and his son-in-law Jared Kushner is Jewish, Trump has still hugely coalesced and catalyzed white nationalism and anti-Semitism. They've said it to me. I've spoken to people like Richard Spencer who explain it to me. The latest report from the Anti-Defamation League about anti-Semitism is horrible. We even saw Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee, including their lead counsel, Steve Castor, play off of the anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalty to try to discredit impeachment witness Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. His family are Jewish immigrants from Europe, and during the impeachment inquiry hearings in November, Republicans tried to play up this anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalty. And it was quite frankly inevitable that eventually there would be a faction that turns the entire movement to hold Trump accountable for the things he has done into an anti-Semitic trope or conspiracy theory. And now we are seeing the idea of that movement, the entire movement to get rid of Trump, to hold him accountable, to impeach him. It is now being chalked up as a Jewish conspiracy by more and more people. And again, I'm shocked it took this long, because when you step back from it, there are just too many overlaps between the ways that the right has defended Trump and common anti-Semitic tropes. The deep state cabal of people working to control the public-facing instruments of power like the presidency, they think that's what impeachment is, and they often say that that's what Jews do. There's a lot of overlap there. There are too many Jews involved in the impeachment hearings. Adam Schiff is Jewish. That Democratic counsel, Daniel Goldman, is Jewish. It's the Jews once again. So it was obvious that it was only a matter of time until this happened. And now our old buddy, I'm not being serious about that, Christian pastor Rick Wiles, a truly sick individual, is saying that impeachment is an attempted Jew coup. I can't possibly say it like he says it, so take a listen.
That's the way the Jews work. They are deceivers. They plot, they lie, they do whatever they have to do to accomplish their political agenda. This impeach Trump movement is a Jew coup. And the American people better wake up to it really fast, because this thing is moving now towards a vote in the House and then a trial in the Senate. We could have a trial before Christmas. This country could be in civil war at Christmas time.
That's right.
A Jew coup. There it is. And the thing is, there has been whacked out anti-Semitic Christian pastors for a long time. That's not newsworthy in and of itself. What's different today is that they are more emboldened than ever by Donald Trump. And not only is there a risk of real world violence, they are pushing it. Here's Rick Wiles moments later starting to talk about, the military, members of the military are going to have to pick a side here, either with the Jew coup or against the Jew coup.
Members of the U.S. military are going to have to take a stand, just like they did in the 1860s with the Civil War. They're going to have to decide, are you fighting for the North or the South? Members of the government are going to have to take a side. Instead of north, south, it's going to be left or right. People are going to be forced, possibly by this Christmas, to take a stand because of this Jew coup in the United States. We have weeks to stop it. That's why I'm speaking out. That's why I'm putting everything on the line, saying this is a coup led by Jews to overthrow the constitutionally elected president of the United States. And it's beyond removing Donald Trump. It's removing you and me.
Wow, really courageous. A wacky evangelical Christian pastor blames the Jews for something. We've never seen that before. Really, I admire his courage in taking a stand on that. So we're seeing a very disturbing combination here of right-wing nationalism, anti-Semitism, and Christian nationalism. And what's worst about all of this is that we want to be careful not to participate in the escalation of violence. We don't want any violence. We want Trump removed by people voting him out. Or if a constitutionally enshrined impeachment process removes Trump, then okay. We don't want violence. They are both the people saying there might be violence and the people who would do it and the people who are starting to allude to physical violence to resist any kind of outcome that leads to Donald Trump being out of the White House. So we then ended up in a position where I find it necessary to remember we shouldn't be violent like them. We can't be violent like them. They do, by the way, though, these evangelical, I hate to even call them churches, so-called churches, they need to lose their tax-exempt status. This is political advocacy, which violates the tenets of those non-profit statuses that are given to these evangelical groups and churches. They need to stop spreading racism. They need to stop spreading nationalism and anti-Semitism. But by predicting violence, they are also likely to cause violence because fundamentally it's what they want. It's a sick reality that we're dealing with right now. But again, I'm surprised it took this long for the anti-Semitism to overlap with the movement to hold Trump accountable. It's happening now. We are seeing it. We will have more coverage of this on the show's Instagram page. Make sure you're following us there at David Pakman Show. And while you're there, follow me on Instagram as well at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So the big change in polling in the Democratic primary during the Thanksgiving break, and really since the last Democratic debate, is that Pete Buttigieg has been rapidly gaining in the polls, while Elizabeth Warren is down pretty significantly. Joe Biden is also down. Now, before we get into the meat of this, there will be people who say, David, Bernie always gets ignored in these stories. I'm not ignoring Bernie. Bernie's up slightly from early October, down slightly from earlier in November. Not a huge change in Bernie's polling. For the people who say Yang gets ignored, I'm not ignoring him. Yang is up to 3.3%. But the real big shift is that Pete Buttigieg, mayor of South Bend, Indiana, has continued climbing from 4% in early September to 8% on November 1st, up to an average of 11% in recent polls, even polling as high as 16% nationally in the last Quinnipiac poll. Meanwhile, Joe Biden has continued his decline down to 27%. Elizabeth Warren has also dropped from a campaign high of nearly 27 in the first week of October to just under 16 now, losing about 11 points nationally. This is the lowest she's been since mid-September. So do I like this? No, I don't. I'm not a Buttigieg guy. In number one, Pete Buttigieg has parroted this absurd talking point about Medicare for all, calling it Medicare for all who want it, which is a complete cop-out. It's incoherent. It's not really a position, and I don't like it one bit. I don't trust it one bit. Buttigieg's bizarre reactions when he's been asked about his struggles with Black Democratic primary voters have been, like I said, they've been bizarre. Pete Buttigieg's position that free college isn't good because it leads to people who earn less subsidizing people who earn more by paying for their college through taxes is not a strong position. Then more recently, Buttigieg proposed free college for lower and middle income people so that the kids of millionaires don't get their tuition paid. And this is an old centrist idea, which I find illogical because the kids of millionaires are already more likely to go to college, and saying they won't even possibly get free state college makes it easier for them to argue they shouldn't even be contributing to anyone going to college tuition free anyway. It's not a good idea. Pete Buttigieg is also way more religious than I'm interested in having a president be. Now, I know that we're supposed to pretend it's fine because even though he's very religious, he's gay and a Democrat. But either he's being insincere when he talks about his religiosity, or he's just more religious than appeals to me. I would rather have someone who doesn't make religion such a central component of their identity as Pete Buttigieg has. Buttigieg has also signaled automation as being the primary cause of the loss of manufacturing jobs in the U.S. That's pretty myopic, and it ignores much of the systemic inequality of power in the economy between workers and companies, which is a huge part of that job loss. Now, automation is a concern. I'm glad that he's talking about it because a lot of elected officials or would-be elected officials don't. But his view seems either just misguided or ignorant or insincere. And then Buttigieg participated in meetings months ago with Democratic Party insiders and big donors to discuss stopping Bernie at any cost, which is also not good. That's like the worst wing of the Democratic Party. So that's why I'm not a Buttigieg guy. He's doing very well in the polls. I don't know if he has staying power, if he's going to keep growing his support. If you look at early primary states, he's doing very well in Iowa, leading. He's leading in New Hampshire, but by less than he's leading in Iowa. Not doing very well in Nevada and South Carolina, which are the third and fourth primary states. So my question to you is, what do you believe is behind Pete Buttigieg's climb in the polls? Is it debate performance? Is it that he's being pushed by media or party elites, if you believe that that's what's going on? Is it his campaign ads? Is it people being disappointed in other candidates and saying Buttigieg seems like a reasonable alternative? And while we're at it, I'm also curious what you think is behind Elizabeth Warren's decline. Joe Biden's, I have a sense of. Joe Biden is bad in the debates. And the more he seems to talk, the more he seems to struggle in the polls. But Warren gained for months by getting opportunities to explain her positions and ideas. And lately she's falling despite getting lots of talk time at the latest debate. Let me know what you believe is behind Warren's decline and Buttigieg's climb, and then we'll talk about it more later in the week. Think that Donald Trump is a better president than Abraham Lincoln. There's a new Economist YouGov poll from right around Thanksgiving, and it's a normal poll where they ask about many things. They ask about presidential approval, opinions of items in the news, but then it has something very interesting, and it asks, how do you see Trump versus past presidents? And this is a real insight into Trumpist minds, and it also relates to some cognitive biases that are important to understand. So this will be useful. Voters were asked, which Republican was a better president, Donald Trump or Abraham Lincoln? Most demographic groups, no matter how you slice it, were pretty evenly united that Lincoln was a better president. If you look at men and women roughly equally, mid-70s to mid-20s, believe Lincoln was a better president. Okay. When you look at different income groups, people earning under 50,000, between 50 and 100,000, and more than 100,000, roughly by the same 3-to-1 margin, they view Lincoln as the better president than Donald Trump. But when you look at party identification, Republicans by a 53-to-47 margin believe that Donald Trump is a better president than Abraham Lincoln. Now, as a side note, before we continue, Republicans also think Trump is a way better president than George W. Bush by a 71-to-29 margin, which is stunning. And again, George W. Bush was no angel, truly, but Trump, incredible. But let's discuss what's going on here, because there's evidence of a few different things. Number one, there is a blinding ideology for some where they truly see Trump as the best without applying any real critical thinking to the question of Lincoln versus Trump. They just say Trump's better. For others, it's ignorance. They don't really know what Lincoln did. So Trump is better in their minds. It's a combination of ignorance plus lack of critical thinking. For others, they actually don't like Lincoln because he freed the slaves and was on the side of the Union in the Civil War. You can see this when you look at the regionalized results, where in the South, the numbers are most skewed against Lincoln and towards Trump. And then there are just some sort of general cognitive biases at play. There's the recency bias. That's where a person more easily remembers recent events compared to something that occurred a while back. That will skew results. This would suggest that any poll about the current president versus a president hundreds of years ago would be skewed towards the current president to some degree because of recency bias. Then you also have the availability bias, which is kind of implicit in what I already told you. This is the human tendency to think of examples more easily of things that happened recently and to imagine that they are representative to a greater degree than they are. So if you can think of more things Trump did that you like compared to Lincoln, you extrapolate and you say, well, Trump is better on that basis because I can remember more things that Donald Trump did. So this is about many things. It is in part about the ideologically blinded, ignorant Republicans. It's also about the cult of personality around Donald Trump, but there are some general cognitive biases at play as well. What I believe this points to as a strategy, and I know I'm a broken record on this, you can't argue with people who think Trump is better than Lincoln and rationally explain to them why they should vote for someone else. Let's not even try that as a way to win in 2020. I told you earlier in the show when we watched video of that totally delusional Trump supporter who said, I love Trump because he's honest and he has integrity and he has family values. You can't argue with that. If someone has a disagreement on tax policy and they like Trump's tax policy, we might be able to have a conversation. When someone is so deluded and disconnected from reality, the arguments are a waste of time. We're better off getting out the vote. We're better off finding people who are already on our side, but might not care enough to vote or might not think their vote is important. Those are the folks that we want to be going after, trying to change the minds of someone who loves Trump's family values or thinks Trump is a better president than Lincoln. It's a waste of time. It's not going to win the November of 2020 election for us. Let me know what you think. Leave a reply if you're watching on YouTube. Send me a tweet at dpacman. We will take a quick break and then talk about interesting news out of Google and YouTube. I also have some book recommendations for you, an excellent voicemail. Glad you're with us on this first show back after the Thanksgiving holiday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
More than 300 ads for Donald Trump's re-election campaign have been rejected by YouTube and Google, and it is a fascinating situation and one that was misreported to begin with. There were a whole bunch of headlines floating around which made it appear as though these were Trump ads that had been pulled down. But the truth is these were never approved to begin with, and it does change our interpretation of this. So we've talked before about how Donald Trump's behavior on Twitter does seem to violate Twitter's own terms and conditions because he's bullying people, he's causing dogpiling and targeted harassment. There's a really good case to be made that Donald Trump's Twitter account should be banned, but it hasn't been. In the last few months, I've been getting more and more emails from viewers saying, you know, David, before your videos on YouTube, I'm seeing a Trump ad, and the ad is often riddled with lies, or it's attacking individuals in ways that seems to go against YouTube's rules or whatever. And of course, I always explain, we don't have any control over the ads, but that people can report them to YouTube if they believe that the ads violate the terms and conditions. We then heard from YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki. I continue not to understand how it's pronounced Wojcicki, but I guess that's how she pronounces it. I don't know. She was interviewed on 60 Minutes, and she said that over the summer, 300 different Donald Trump ads were not approved, and they were not run at all because they violated either YouTube or Google's guidelines. And immediately as news started to spread of this, speculation was rampant about if Trump's ridiculous ads are mostly allowed on YouTube, what was in the ones that were so bad that YouTube rejected them? CBS reviewed the documents and realized we have no idea why they were rejected. We see that they were rejected, but we don't know why. Could it be because the ads were telling extreme lies or inaccuracies? Could it be that the titles had bad punctuation or grammar? Google ads don't allow stuff, for example, like all caps. That's not allowed. But is it just copyright? And I believe that that's the most likely thing. There are lots of headlines that are reacting to this as, wow, YouTube is willing to do what Facebook will not do, which is not to allow ads that are targeted harassment, not to allow ads that are riddled with lies. We have no evidence that that's why these ads were rejected by Google and YouTube. And the simplest and most likely explanation is that these ads either had some music in them that the Trump campaign did not demonstrate that they had the rights to, because I'm sure they didn't have the rights to it because Trump regularly uses music at events that he doesn't have the rights to, or that it was a grammar, capitalization, punctuation thing. That is actually something Google is strict about. The lies are not really the problem. There is no reason right now to think that YouTube and Google have done anything different than what Facebook has done about lies in political ads. They've done nothing. Facebook has done nothing. YouTube, Google has done nothing about it. Susan Wojcicki may knowingly be hiding behind these reports, since she knows that the reports don't tell us why the 300 ads were rejected. I wouldn't put it past the Trump campaign to deliberately submit ads they know will be rejected, so at some later point they can pull out of their pockets the victim card and say, oh, our ads are being rejected. It's anti-Republican bias. So we've got to be really careful with these stories. And case in point, the first headlines were just wrong. There was a headline that said 300 Trump ads taken down. It's not true. They weren't approved to begin with. Takedown suggests they were public ads. Something happened. There was outrage and the ads were pulled. These ads were never approved. And number two, the implication that this was for content, there's not evidence of that as of right now. Most likely, this is for copyright issues, spelling issues, formatting issues. If we play along with the false narrative, or at least the unsubstantiated narrative, that these ads were published and then taken down for content, which is not what happened, then that allows the Trump administration to claim martyrdom and to claim anti-right-wing bias. The reality is they're not the victims here. They're most likely benefiting from the power of the bully pulpit, just like Trump has ignored requests for documents and testimony and the like without consequence, just like Trump regularly flouts the terms and conditions on Twitter with no repercussions whatsoever. This appears to be another version of the same thing. Let's report what we know happened, which is simply that ads were not approved. Let's not pretend to know why when we don't. And I would love to hear, by the way, from Susan Wojcicki, what it is that YouTube, if anything, plans to do about inaccurate and bullying political ads, because we're getting into the season now. And I'll be honest with you, if YouTube cracks down on inaccurate or bullying, targeted harassment political ads, the David Pakman Show will make less money. What I mean by that is election years are our biggest years historically, biggest growth and biggest what's called revenue per thousand views. Why? Because since we do news and politics on YouTube, more and more candidates start to want to buy ads that will play before our videos. The way YouTube ads work is that there's a sort of auction system where when there's more demand, you have to be willing to pay more per time that your ad is displayed. Because there's more competition, that price goes up and up and up when there is a lot of interest in politics, like in an election year. If indeed YouTube were to crack down on this, it would be worse financially for the David Pakman Show, but it would be the right thing to do because this has become so toxic and such a reliable means through which misinformation and disinformation can be spread that something has to be done. However, the practicality of it is extremely difficult to imagine actually handling in a fair way, which is why I understand Twitter saying no more political ads. I mean, if YouTube did that, we might be out of business. But I understand why Twitter took the decision that they took. Let me know what you think. Okay, I've got some great books to recommend to you today. As always, davidpakman.com/recommendations. For all of my recommendations, if you use the links there to buy these books on Amazon, we get a slice of every transaction. davidpakman.com/recommendations. Today I have 2 fiction, 1 nonfiction. Let me start with the latest book by John le Carré. As many of you know, John le Carré, one of my favorite authors. I think I've read all but one of his books. 20 or so. John le Carré is extremely prolific. He has been putting out a good book basically every few years since the early 60s. I think it was the early or mid 60s when Spy Who Came In From the Cold came out. That might have been like 68. That was his third book. So I think his first one must have been 62, 63, somewhere in there. Extremely prolific. The author of such books as The Constant Gardener, Spy Who Came In From the Cold, the Tinker Tailor trilogy, A Most Wanted Man is a very good one, The Tailor of Panama. Anyway, the last few books by John le Carré have been by normal standards very good, but not his best work. The latest one, called Agent Running in the Field, which published just a month or two ago, I would argue is his best book of the last, I think I would say 10 years or even longer. Excellent, excellent book. It's sort of the merging of two different stories. One of a sort of retiring, soon to retire spy who is brought back home to have sort of a relatively mundane, not particularly a well-respected position, and the overlap between that and a friend that this individual makes when back in London. I'll tell you that and nothing else. Excellent book, very quick read. I highly recommend it. Number two, the latest book by Blake Crouch. Blake Crouch has been a guest on this program. Blake Crouch wrote Dark Matter. He authored Good Behavior, which has been turned into a TV show somewhere, I think, although I've not seen it. He authored Wayward Pines. I believe that's a trilogy. I think that's been turned into a series. His latest book is Recursion. It is a sci-fi book. It is sort of a time travel book, but not in the traditional sense. It's a time travel book, the likes of which I've never read before. And I'll just give you this little grain. If this seems interesting, then definitely pick this one up. In most time travel stories, if I travel back to my year, to the year I was 5 years old, 1989, I would be my current age, but I would be living in 1989, and I continue aging consecutively. In this book, the concept is I travel back to 1989 with all of the knowledge and experience that I currently have, but I go back to being 5 years old, and I'm basically reliving years of my life. That's the concept, very different than most time travel books. Recursion by Blake Crouch. Get this one if you're into sci-fi. Very, very good. Sent Blake a note about it, and maybe we'll have him back on the program. Really great stuff. Okay, those are two fiction recommendations. And I have just one nonfiction recommendation for you. This is a thick one, so I've been getting through fewer books because I've been reading some big boys. This is Principles by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is, I believe, in his early 70s now. He is one of the most successful investors. A lot of people know about Warren Buffett. Fewer people in sort of popular culture know about Ray Dalio. Maybe it's Dalio, not sure how he pronounces it. But this book it's not an investment book. It's not a business book. It's not an autobiography. It's sort of all of these things and more. And it is very interesting from the point of view of growing an organization, if you're interested in that. It's interesting from the point of view of how one matures and changes their perspective on their work as they grow and age, which I found super interesting. And it is not super dense. I mean, it's for the number of pages that it is, which I think is like nearly 600. Yes, nearly 600 pages. It's a relatively quick read. And if you're into this type of book, or even if you're not, I would recommend that you try it. Check out davidpakman.com/recommendations for all of these and more. Remember, if you get any of these using the links at davidpakman.com/recommendations, we get a little slice of your transaction. And that is, of course, very much appreciated. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Today, I have a voicemail from a psychiatric nurse who claims to know what it is that happened to Donald Trump relating to that unexpected hospital visit a couple of weeks ago. Let's take a listen to her perspective.
Hi, David. This is Catherine, retired psychiatric nurse. I've called you a few times. I think probably what happened to Trump when he went to the hospital is that he fell, because at his latest rally in Florida, he has a new hairpiece, and it's covering what looks like his right cheek a little bit too much. there's like the hair is too thick and the cheek looks swollen. I mean, he always looks swollen, but I'm looking for my phone. I don't have it on the big screen, so maybe it's not so, but that's just my impression.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting because number one, nobody even speculated about a fall, but interestingly, Donald Trump recently getting off of the lower stairs off of Air Force One several times. And we said, well, that could be if there's concern about him falling, sometimes accompanied side by someone deplaning with him when he comes off the big stairs recently. The idea being there's someone there to sort of keep him up against the side of the stairs, again, to prevent falling. I went back and looked at the rally that is mentioned here. And it is true that Donald Trump, I mean, listen, I guess he denies wearing a toupee. If you believe that he wears one, there was a puff of hair on his left cheek. I think she says the right. It is the right side if you're watching the rally with Trump facing you, but it's Trump's left. There is a puff of hair there. Again, it could just be windblown. I don't really know. And again, it does sort of seem like the left cheek area is kind of swollen. So this is the first I've heard of it. Found it interesting that a viewer noticed this. I can tell you only to go back and look at the Florida rally footage yourself and make of it what you will. We have such a great bonus show for you today. I'm going to tell you some Thanksgiving stories, number one. I will also tell you about a sort of social experiment that I ran with the Black Friday membership special. I'm not going to say any more. I think you will find this really, really interesting. And I hope that you will sign up either at joinpacman.com or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I think you will find today's social experiment that I reveal on the bonus show very, very interesting and compelling. I'll speak to you then or otherwise tomorrow. And yes, we will be live streaming Wednesday's impeachment inquiry hearings on at least YouTube, if not YouTube and Twitch. More on that on tomorrow's program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.